Hey HannahMouse1 here. Some of you may have seen that over the past week I've been uploading a series of tutorials for a Halloween themed game called Pumpkin Patch Panic, and I've edited these into a single supercut without any of the intros or outros for your viewing convenience. Enjoy! For part 1, I'll be showing you how to make the player move around the screen, but first I want you to head on down to the description and remix the blank version of the project that is linked there. This will contain all of the art and audio assets, but none of the code so that you can code along with me. But once you've done that, let's jump in. Go to the player sprite. The first thing that we're going to do is drag in a when green flag is clicked block from the events tab. This is the block that registers when the player starts the game, so we need it if we want anything to run. However, we don't want to run our main gameplay loop off of this, so we're going to create a new message. Attach a broadcast message 1 block to the green flag script, click on the drop down and make a new message. Call it play. Then drag in a when I receive block and select the new play message. I've separated the player character sprites into the upper body and the legs because it will allow us to have the player hold things without affecting the leg sprites. To get this to display correctly, we're going to use clones. We're going to need a new variable. Click onto the variables tab, select make a variable and call it this_type. Make sure that you select for this sprite only and click OK. Then add a hide block to the play message receiver. After this, set this type to body and add a create clone of myself block. Then set this type to legs and create clone of myself. Next, we need to get the clones to switch to the correct costume. Drag in a when I start as a clone block to this and attach a show block. Then attach a forever loop. Add an if else function within the loop and drag an equals operator into the condition space. Set the left hand side to be a this type input and set the right hand to say body. In the if portion of the loop, switch costume to body down 1, and in the else portion, switch costume to legs down 1. The player will now display on screen. But let's get her moving, shall we? For this we're going to need 5 new variables. So head back to the variables tab. All of these should be for all sprites and call them player X, player Y, XVal, YVal, and magnitude. Under the when I receive play script, set player X to 0 and player Y to -120. Then add a forever loop. Then go back to the when I start as a clone block, and in the forever loop add a go to XY block. We want the clones to go to player X, player Y. We're now going to make a custom block to handle the player movement. Go to the My Blocks tab and make a block. Into the namespace type movement velocity and add a number or text input. Call this input velocity. Then add a label and type in friction and then add a friction number or text input. Do the same for X input and Y input. Select run without screen refresh and click OK. Run without screen refresh ensures that the entire code block will run in a single frame, which is what we want. You'll now see a define block for our movement script, so we can start coding in the player's movement. First, drag our new movement block into the forever loop under the play message. Set velocity to 2, friction to 5. Then drag a minus operator into both the X and Y input spaces. Now go to the sensing tab. To set the X and Y inputs, we need to understand how Boolean variables work. A Boolean variable is defined as either true or false. The space key is either pressed true or not pressed false, but this also holds a numerical value. A false Boolean will be equal to 0 and a true Boolean will be equal to 1. We can use this to set the values for the player's movement. I want to use WASD movement, so for X we want it to read key D pressed minus key A pressed, and for Y we want it to read key W pressed minus key S pressed. But if you chose to use, say, the arrow keys for instance, it would be right arrow key pressed minus left arrow key pressed and up arrow key pressed minus down arrow key pressed. Setting these values will now allow us to test the movement script as we write it. So let's write it. In its most simple form, all we need is to change player X by X input times velocity and to change player Y by Y input times velocity. However, there are some problems with this method. First, the player will move faster if moving diagonally than if they're moving along the X or Y axis, which feels a bit off. And the player also stops very suddenly when the key is released, which again feels off. So let's fix these issues. Let's detach these two blocks for now and instead add a set XVal block and a set YVal block. We want to set XVal to be XVal times friction and YVal to be YVal times friction. That will handle the issue of the sudden stop. Then add a set magnitude block. We want this to calculate how far the player is moving within a single frame. To do this, we need some maths. Drag in a square root block and into the input of that add an addition. Then drag a multiplication operator into each side of that addition. We want it to read the square root of X input by X input plus Y input by Y input, which you might recognize as the Pythagorean theorem, which is used to calculate the hypotenuse or slopey side of a right-angled triangle. Then add an if statement and set the condition to be not magnitude is equal to 0. Within the statement, change XVal by X input divided by magnitude and change yvel by y input divided by magnitude. This is called normalizing the movement vector, which means that the distance that the player will move will be 1, solving the moving faster on diagonals issue. Then after the if statement, re-add the player x and player y blocks, but now we want them to read change player x by xvel times velocity and player y by yvel times velocity. Now we have the player moving around the screen. Let's get the player animated. To do this, create 3 new variables, all for all sprites. The first should be called costume, the second direction, and the third state. Under when I receive play, set direction to down, then head back to the define block for movement. Add an if-else statement and set the condition to be if magnitude is equal to 0. In the if portion of the statement, set state to idle, else set state to walk. Then add another if-else function. For the condition, we want it to read y input is greater than 0. In the if portion, set the direction to up. Drag another if-else function into the else portion of the function, and for the condition we want y input is less than 0. In this case, we set direction to down. For the else function, we need yet another if-else function with the condition x input is greater than 0, and here we'll set direction to right. And else, drag an if function with the condition x input is less than 0, setting direction to left. Now we need to drag in a new when I receive play block and add a forever loop to this. Within this loop, wait 0.2 seconds and then add an if-else function. Set the condition to be if state is equal to idle, and within the if portion of the statement, set costume to 1. And in the else function, add another if-else function with the condition costume is equal to 4. Within the if portion of the statement, set costume to 1 and else change costume by 1. This script will update the costume 5 times a second. We can now use all of this information to update the costumes for the player clones. Go to the forever loop where the clone switch costume and drag a join operator into each of the switch costume blocks. Type body into the first input block in the if portion, then legs into the first input of the one in the else portion. Then drag join operators into the second input of both. For these, set the first inputs to direction and the second to costume. Today we'll be adding in the pumpkins. Go to the pumpkin sprite and drag in a when green flag is clicked block and attach a hide block. Then drag in a when I receive play block. We want to generate a pumpkin for each space in the plant bed. To do this, we're going to create a custom block. Go to my blocks, click make a block and call it clone. Select run without screen refresh and click OK. Add a clone block to the when I receive play script. Now we're going to define our clone script. For this, we're going to need to create a new variable for this sprite only called this value. Under the define clone script, set this value to 0. Then add a repeat loop, repeating 40 times. Within this loop, create clone of myself and change this value by 1. Add a when I started a clone block, and to this attach a forever loop. We're going to need 2 more variables, both for this sprite only, called this xpos and this ypos. Within the loop, we'll need a set this xpos block and a set this ypos block. We're going to need some math to set these positions correctly. For the xpos, add a subtraction operator and add a multiplication operator into the left-hand side. Into the left-hand side of that, add a mod operator. The mod, or modulus, of 2 numbers is the remainder when the first is divided by the second. So 2 mod 2 will be 0, 3 mod 2 will be 1, etc. Set the first input space to be this value and the second to be 8, which is the number of pumpkins in a row. The third should be 32, or the width of each tile space, and the final input should be 112. For ypos, we again need a subtraction with a multiplication in the left-hand side. Into the left-hand side of this, add a floor operator, which will round down whatever value is in the input space, and into said input space add a division operator. Into the first empty input space add a this value input. Set the second to 8, and then both the third and fourth spaces should be 32. Then show and go to this xpos, this ypos. Let's get the pumpkins a-growing, shall we? Create a new list and call it pumpkins. And at the top of our clone script, add a delete all of pumpkins block. And within the loop, add 0 to pumpkins. Now go back to the player sprite and create a new block. Into the namespace, type update growth rate and add a number or text input called growth rate. Select run without screen refresh and click OK. Drag an update block into the forever loop with the movement block. Set growth rate to 2500. Let's get this defined. For this, we need to create a new variable for all sprites called updating. Under the define block, set updating to 1. Then drag in a repeat loop and set the number of repeats to the length of pumpkins. Into the loop, add an if-else statement. Drag an equals operator into the condition space and an item 1 of pumpkins input into the left-hand side. Replace 1 with updating and type 0 into the right-hand side of the equals operator. Drag an if statement into the if portion of the function. set the condition to be pick random 1 to growth rate is equal to 1, and within the function replace updating of pumpkins with 1. In the else portion of the if-else function, add an if function. Drag an and operator into the condition space. The first of these conditions should be item updating of pumpkins is less than 4, and the second should be pick random 1 to 100 is equal to 1. Within this function, replace item updating of pumpkins plus 1. After the if-else function, change updating by 1. This block will cycle through the pumpkins list, and if the pumpkin isn't yet growing, it might start them growing or progress an already growing pumpkin to the next stage. Now let's get the pumpkin clones to display these changes. Go back to the pumpkin sprite and find the when I start as a clone script. We need an if-else function. Move the goTo block to after this function, the show block into the else portion of the function, and the set x and y blocks into the if portion. Put this into the forever loop and drag an equals operator into the condition space. We need the condition to read if item this value of pumpkins plus 1 is equal to 0. We need a hide block in the if portion and a switch costume block in the else portion. For the costume, switch item to this value plus 1 of pumpkins. The pumpkins will now grow. Now, let's make it so that the player can pick the pumpkins up. We need 2 more variables for this, both for all sprites, touching and holding. After the goTo block in the forever loop, change y by 11. This is to account for the vertical offset between the player and pumpkin sprites. Then add an if-else function. Set the condition to be if distance to player is less than 16, and within this portion of the else function, set touching to this value. Add an if statement into the else portion and set the condition of this to be if touching is equal to this value, and in this, set touching to none. Then change y by -11. We also need to go back to the player sprite, and after the update block, set x to player x and y to player y. I want the fully grown pumpkins to light up if touching the player, so after where we set the pumpkin's costume, add a set brightness to 0 block. After this, add an if statement with the condition if this value plus 1 of pumpkins is 4. Within the function, add another if function with the condition touching equals this value. Within the function, set brightness to 25. Now go back to the player sprite, and under the play script which handles our gameplay loop, set holding to none before the forever loop. Then add in a when key E is pressed block. To this, attach an if-else statement and set the condition to read if holding is equal to none. Drag an if statement into the if portion. The condition should be if touching plus 1 of pumpkins is equal to 4. In the function, set holding to touching. Within the else portion, set holding to none. Go up to where the player clones set their costumes and drag the body set costume block into the if portion of the if-else statement. Set the condition to be if holding is equal to none. Right click and duplicate the set costume block from the if portion and put the new block into the else portion of the function. Within this, drag the costume input into the left hand side of the addition operator and type 4 into the other. Now go back to the pumpkin sprite. After the if statement that highlights the pumpkin that the player is touching, add another if statement. This time we need the condition to be if holding is equal to this value. Within this, hide and set this x pos to player x and set this y pos to player y. The player can now pick up and move the pumpkins. Now go to the box sprite. Within this, add a when green flag is clicked block and go to x64 and y -120 and hide. Then add a when I receive play and a show. Add a forever loop, attach an if-else statement and set the condition to read if distance to player is less than 32. In the if portion, set brightness effect to 10. Else, set brightness effect to 0. Go back to the player sprite and find the when E key is pressed script. Add an if statement into the else portion of the existing function before the set holding to none block. Set the condition to read if distance to box is less than 32. Within the function, replace holding plus 1 of pumpkins with 0. Now we need a new variable for all sprites called score. Within the function, change score by 1. Go back to the play script with the gameplay loop, set score to 0 before the forever loop. While the game is now technically playable, you might notice that something's a bit off with how the sprites are being displayed. Right now the game has no understanding of depth, so doesn't know the order in which sprites should be shown in front of others. Let's fix that by implementing something called sorting order. Go to the workspace for the stage. Add a when I receive play block and to this attach a forever loop. We're going to create a custom block. Call it sorting order and make sure that run without screen refresh is selected. Add this new block into the forever loop. We also need a new list. Call it sorting order. Under the define sorting order block, delete all of the sorting order list. Then add an if else function. Set the condition to read if player y is greater than -120 and within the if portion, add player to sorting order and then add box to sorting order. Else, we want to add box to sorting order order, and then add player. This will log whether the player or the box should be on top. Now let's add all of the pumpkins to this list. To do this, create a new variable called sort. In our sorting order script, we want this set to 1 and then add a repeat loop. Set the number of repeats to be length of pumpkins. We now need another variable. Let's call it sort check. Within the loop, set sort check to 1, and then we need another repeat loop with length of sorting order as the number of repeats. This means that for each pumpkin, it checks every item in the sorting order list to see where it fits. Within the loop, add an if statement. Drag a not operator into the condition space, and then add a sorting order contains thing block into that. Into the input of that, drag a join operator, and we want to join the word pumpkin with the sort variable. But before we can sort the pumpkins, we need a way to reference their Y positions. Go back to the pumpkin sprite and create a new list, pumpkin Ys. In the clone script where we generate all of the pumpkins, delete all of pumpkin Ys before the loop, and add 0 to pumpkins within said loop. Then find the part of the when I started the clone script where the clone's Y position is shifted by 11. Here, we want to replace item this val plus 1 of pumpkin Ys with this Y pos. Now go back to the stages workspace and our sorting order script. Add an if else statement into the if function. Set the condition to be if item sort check of sorting order is equal to box then, and add another if statement into this. Drag a greater than operator into the condition space. We need this to read if item sort of pumpkin Ys is greater than minus 120 then, and within this function insert join pumpkin sort at sort check of sorting order. Right click the inner if statement to duplicate it and drag it into the empty else function. This time we want it to be if item sort check of sorting order is equal to player, and replace the minus 120 with the variable player Y. And finally, we're going to add in the comparison for if it's comparing to a different pumpkin. Add in an if else statement into the empty else function. Drag an equals operator into the condition space. We need the condition to read if length of item sort check of sorting order is equal to 8 then. Drag an if statement into the if portion of the function and drag a less than operator into the condition space. Set the left hand side to item letter 8 of sort check of sorting order of pumpkin Ys, and the right hand side to item sort of pumpkin Ys. Within the function insert join pumpkin sort at sort check of sorting order. Duplicate this inner if statement and drag it into the empty else function. Drag this letter 8 of sort check of sorting order operator into the left hand side of a join operator. For the other side, duplicate and drag in that same letter 8 operator and change the 8 to a 9. Then we need a change sort check by 1 block at the end, 2 loops in. Then 1 loop in, we need an if statement. Drag a not operator into the condition space. We need this to read if not sorting order contains join pumpkin sort then. Within the function, add join pumpkin sort to sorting order, and after the function a change sort by 1. All of the entities are now added to the sorting order list, and we now just need to get the pumpkin sprites to use this when deciding what layer to show them in. Let's head back to the player sprite. Find the script where we set the clone's costumes, and at the end of the forever loop add a go to back layer block and a go forward 1 layers block. Drag an item tag of thing in sorting order block into the input space and type in player into the input space of that. We can now move on to the pumpkins. Go to the part of the code where the pumpkin's Y position is shifted by 11 and go to back layer. We need another go forward block with another item tag of thing in sorting order block. This time we need a join operator as the input, with the left hand side as pumpkin and the right hand side as this value plus 1. And because the player counts as 2 layers, one for the body, one for the legs, we need one more go forward block. This time with the input, this Y pos is less than player Y. Finally go to the box sprite. Within the forever loop, go to back layer, go forward item tag of box in sorting order layers, and go forward Y position is less than player Y. Today we'll be adding the enemies. Head over to the enemy sprite and drag in a when I receive play block, and to this attach a hide block. Now we want to create a new list, enemies, and this will keep track of all the enemies that are currently in play. Under the play script, delete all of enemies, then repeat 5 times, add none to enemies. Then add a forever loop, and within this loop add a wait block. Set this to be pick random 1 to 5 seconds. Add an if statement with the condition entities contains none. We then need to make 2 variables for this sprite only. The first should be called this type and the second this ID. Within the if statement, set this type to 1 for now and set this ID to item tag of none in enemies. Then create clone of myself. Then add in a when I start as a clone block, and to this attach a show block and a go to block. For Y, set it to 160, and for X, drag in a pick random operator. For this, we need it to be pick random minus 240 to 240. This will set the enemy's initial position to any random point along the top edge of the screen. Then add a forever loop. Within this loop, replace item this ID of enemies with floor of Y position. Up to 5 enemies will now spawn at any given time, but we need to give them some functionality. Let's start with the zombie enemy. This will just walk around the pumpkin patch and crush the pumpkins, and will run away if approached by the player. For this, we're going to need a lot of new variables, all for this sprite only. 6 to be exact. This state, this target X, this target Y, this X vel, this Y vel, and this magnitude. Before the forever loop, in the create clone of myself script, set target X to pick random -112 to 112, and set target Y to be pick random 97 to -30, which indicates a position within the pumpkin patch. Then add an if-else statement to the forever loop, before where the enemies list is modified. The condition should be this state is equal to 0. And now quickly go back to the play script and set this state to 0 before the forever loop. But back to our if-else function. We're going to start by sorting the X and Y velocities of the enemy, which will act very similarly to how it worked in the player's code from episode 1. Set this X vel to target X minus X position, and set Y vel to target Y minus Y position. Then set this magnitude to the square root of this X vel times this X vel plus this Y vel by this Y vel. Then add an if statement with the condition not magnitude is equal to 0. Within the function, set this X vel to this X vel divided by this magnitude, and set this Y vel to this Y vel divided by this magnitude. After the if statement, change X by this X vel and change Y by this Y vel. The zombie will now go to its first position. Now let's get it to move onto a new position once it's there. Take an if-else function and drag this if statement and everything after it into the else portion. Set the condition to be if this magnitude is less than 2, and within the function, set target X to pick random -112 to 112, and target Y to pick random 97 to -30. Now let's make it so that the zombies crush the pumpkins underfoot. First, we'll need a new list, pumpkin X's. Go to the pumpkin sprite, and in the script that creates the clones, delete all of pumpkin X's at the beginning and add 0 to pumpkin X's within the repeat 40 loop. Then find the point in the script where the pumpkin Y value is updated, and also replace item this value plus 1 of pumpkin X's with this X pos. Back in the enemies script, create a new block and call it pumpkin check. Make sure that run without screen refresh is selected and click OK. We'll also need a new variable called this pumpkin check. At the start of our new define block, set pumpkin check to 1, then repeat length of pumpkins, and I'm going to copy these 3 blocks that set the X vel, the Y vel, and the magnitude and drag those into the loop. However, this time for the X vel, we want it to be X position, item this pumpkin check of pumpkin X's, and likewise for Y, we want Y position, item this pumpkin check of pumpkin Y's. Then add in an if statement and drag an AND operator into the condition space. For the first condition, we want it to read if magnitude is less than 16, and for the second, if item pumpkin check of pumpkins is equal to 4. And in this case, we want to replace item pumpkin check of pumpkins with 0. After this if statement, change pumpkin check by 1. Go back to where we coded in the behavior for the zombies. After we change the X and Y positions, add in our pumpkin check block. The pumpkins will now be trampled when the zombies walk over them. Now we need the zombies to flee when approached by the player. After our pumpkin check block, drag in an if statement. We need the condition to be if distance to player is less than 32. Within the function, set state to 1. We then need to copy the code that sets the X vel and Y vel and the magnitude. This time with X vel being set to X position minus player X, and Y vel set to Y position minus player Y. We also need to copy in this if statement that divides the X velocity and Y velocity by magnitude. And after the statement, because we want the zombies to flee with some urgency, let's set this X vel to this X vel times 4, and this Y vel to this Y vel times by 4. And in the empty else function, change X by this X vel and change Y by this Y vel. We then need an if statement and drag an OR operator into the condition space. Then drag a greater than operator into each side, and an abs operator into the left hand side of each of these. For those of you who don't know, the abs or absolute value of a number is its size, regardless of whether or not it's positive or negative. So both 5 and -5 have the absolute value of 5. For the first of these conditions, we need the abs of X position is greater than 230, and for the second, we need abs of Y position plus 32 is greater than 190. Then within the function, replace item this ID of enemies with none and delete this clone. Zombies will now run away from the player. Let's now integrate the enemies into the sprite layering script we set up last time. Go to the workspace for the stage where we created our sorting order script. We want to copy everything after and including the line set sort to 1, change this initial repeat length of pumpkins to be repeat length of enemies, and go through anywhere and everywhere it says join pumpkin sort and change it to be join enemy sort. And anywhere it says item sort of pumpkin Ys, change it to be item sort of enemies. In this initial if statement, take the sorting order contains join enemy sort condition and drag it into the left hand side of an OR operator. The condition for the other side should be item sort of enemies is equal to none. We can then copy this condition and replace this same, now incorrect, correct condition in the final if statement. Now take this if else function with the condition length of sort check of sorting order is equal to 8 and drag it into the if portion of an if else function. Set the condition to be if item sort check of sorting order contains pumpkin. Copy this inner loop from the if function and drag it into the empty else function. Change it from letter 8 to 6 and change where it checks pumpkin Ys to enemies. Connect all of this to our sorting order script. Now we need to set the enemy's layer. Go back to the enemy sprite and at the end of the forever loop, go to back layer, go forward, item tag, join enemy, this ID of sorting order layers, and go forward, Y position is less than player Y. Zombies should now appear at the correct layer. So let's get them animated. Drag in a when I start as a clone block and attach a forever loop to this. In this, add an if else function with an AND operator in the condition space. For the first condition, we need it to read if this type is equal to 1, and for the second, we need a not operator with the condition costume name contains zombie. In the function, switch costume to zombie 1. We'll fill in the else portion later. Drag in another when I start as a clone and again add a forever loop. Within this loop, wait 0.2 seconds. After this, we need an if else function with the condition this type is equal to 1. In the if portion, we need another if else statement with the condition this state is equal to 0. Within the if of this, we need yet another if else function, this time with the condition costume name is equal to zombie 1. In the if portion, switch costume to zombie 2, else switch costume to zombie 1. Copy this innermost if else function and drag it into the inner empty else function. This time, we want it to check if costume name is equal to zombie 3, in which case, we'll switch costume to zombie 4, else switch costume to zombie 3, and that's the zombies done. Let's make spiders next, as these will work very similar to zombies. They'll also walk around the pumpkin patch and now replace tiles with cobwebs. These will both stop pumpkins from growing and slow the player if they walk over them, and again, the player can scare the spiders away by approaching them. Go to the play script that creates the enemy clones. Drag in a pick random block into where it sets this type and set it to be pick random 1 to 2. Because I want to be able to tell the enemies apart, let's get the costume sorted first. Find the when I started the clone script that only has the one if else statement inside the loop and copy said if else statement. Drag it into the empty else function. This time we need to check if this type is equal to 2 and whether the costume name contains spider. Switch costume to spider 1. Now go to the other costume script. Copy the if else function with the condition this type is equal to 1 and drag it into the empty else function. We need to check whether this type is equal to 2 and then basically switch anywhere it says zombie to spider, both in conditions and set costume blocks. We now need to alter the spider mechanics. Go to the pumpkin check define block and move this if statement into the if portion of an if else statement. Set the condition to be if this type is equal to 1. Copy the inner if statement and drag it into the empty else function. This time we need to check if item pumpkin check of pumpkins is 0, and we also want to drag the entire condition into an AND function with the extra condition being pick random 1 to 50 is equal to 1, and within the function we want to change this to replace item pumpkin check of pumpkins with 5. The cobwebs will now drop, but we need the player to actually slow down when over them. Go back to the player sprite and find where we run the movement script. Move it into the if portion of an if else function with the condition item touching +1 of pumpkins is equal to 5. Copy the movement block into the else portion and change the velocity of the version in the if portion to be 0.5. Finally, find the if statement that causes the enemy to disappear if it goes out of bounds. Move it into the if portion of an if else statement with the condition this type is equal to 1. Copy said if statement and move the copy into the else portion and change the value 32 to 16 and the value 190 to 170. These values have to be different as the spider sprite is shorter than the zombie sprite. That was an easy one. Let's add in something a bit different. Ghosts. These will chase the player for a few seconds before shooting off the screen. If the player gets too close, they'll be petrified and unable to move for a hot second. First, go to the enemy's script, and in the script where we contain the clones, change this pick random to be pick random 1, 2, 3. Go to the shorter when I started the clone costume script and drag in an if function into the empty else space. Copy the condition from one of the if else functions and use it as the condition for our new function. Change it to be whether checking this type is equal to 3 and whether costume name contains ghost. And within the function, switch costume to ghost 1. Then go to the other when I started a clone costume script. Drag an if else statement into the empty else function with the costume name is equal to ghost 4. In this case, switch costume to ghost 1, else next costume. So ghosts now spawn, but right now they're acting like spiders. Let's change that, shall we? Go to the script which controls the enemy behavior and move this if else statement with the condition this state is equal to 0 into the else portion of an if else function. Make sure these final 4 blocks are outside the function. Set the condition to be if this type is equal to 3. Add a new if else function into the empty if function with the condition this state is equal to 0. Copy in the 3 blocks that set this xval, yval and magnitude. This time for xval we need it to be player x minus x position, and for yval we need it player Y minus Y position. We also need the if statement that divides the xvel and yvel by magnitude, and after this we want to set this xvel to this xvel times 2 and this yvel to this yvel times 2. For the else portion, we can copy this if statement from the zombies that checks if they're out of bounds and drag that in. After the if else function, change x by this xvel and change y by this yvel. Then make a new variable for all sprites and call it petrified. Drag an if statement after the change y by block and add an and operator into the condition space. Set the first condition to be distance to player is less than 32 and the second to be petrified is equal to 0. Within the statement, set petrified to 25 and drag in an if statement. The condition of this should be this state is equal to 0. In this case, set this state to 1, set this xvel to this xvel times minus 2 and this yvel to this yvel times minus 2. This will cause the ghost to fly away after scaring the player. Although right now scaring the player does zip, so we need to change that. Go to the player sprite and find this play script with the movement controls. At the start of this, set petrified to 0. Then take the if else function that controls the player's movement and drag it into the if portion of another if else function. Set the condition to be if petrified is equal to 0 and in the else portion of the function, change petrified by minus 1. We want to create a visual indicator for when the player is petrified, so go to the script that sets the costumes for the clones. Drag the if else statement into the if portion of an if else function with the condition if petrified is equal to 0. In the if portion, set brightness effect to 0 and in the else portion, set brightness to minus 35. This will make it so that the player is dulled out when petrified. To make things a bit more fair, let's make it so that the ghost stops chasing the player after a few seconds. Go back to the enemy sprite and add a new when I start as a clone sprite. Add an if function to this with the condition this type is equal to 3. Within this function, we want to wait 5 seconds and then add another if statement, this time with the condition this state is equal to 0. In the function, set state to 1, set this xvel to this xvel times 2 and this yvel to this yvel times 2. Today we'll be sorting the more technical elements like a timer and the UI. Let's start by adding a new variable for all sprites called timer. In the workspace for the stage, add a new when I receive play block and to this attach a switch backdrop to gameplay block and a set timer to 60 block. Then add a repeat loop repeating 60 times and within this loop we want to wait 1 second and change time by minus 1. After this loop we want to broadcast, select new message from the drop down and call it end. Then switch backdrop to end screen. Now we need to go through our sprites and make it so that ending the game actually stops the scripts. First go to the player sprite and add a when I receive end block. To this we want to attach a stop other scripts in this sprite block and delete this clone. Drag this script onto both the pumpkin and enemy sprites to copy it to those workspaces. Finally go to the box sprite and drag in a when I receive end block and to this add a hide block. Super simple, we now have a time limit and an end screen. Let's create some UI to display the timer and your score. Go to the UI sprite and add a when I receive play block. To this add a hide block. Then create a new block, call it clones and make sure that run without screen refresh is selected before hitting OK. Then create a new variable for this sprite only called this value. Attach a goto block to the clone defined script and set x to be minus 215 and y to 160. Then set this value to 0 and create clone of myself. Then change x by 28, add a repeat loop repeating 5 times and within the loop change this value by 1. Create clone of myself and change x by 22. After the loop change this value by 1 then add another goto block, this time with the x value 195 and the y value 160. Create clone of myself and change x by 22. Then change this value by 1 and create another clone. Attach a clone block to our when I receive play script. All of the clones we need will now be created. Now add in a when I start as a clone block and to this add a show block and a forever loop. Within this loop add an if else statement with the condition this value is equal to 0 and in this case we want to switch costume to pumpkin icon. This will indicate that the following clones will display how many pumpkins the player has collected. In the else portion add another if else function, this one with the condition this value is equal to 6. This will display the 10 digits of the timer, so let's add another if else statement. The condition of this should be if timer is greater than 9. In the if portion of this switch costume to letter 1 of timer, else we want it to hide as it's not needed to display the timer. In the empty else function add another if else function, this time with the condition this value is equal to 7. Within this function add another if else statement again with the condition timer is greater than 9. In the if portion switch costume to letter 2 of timer, else switch costume to timer. The rest of the clones will all go to displaying the score. We need to check whether the clone is needed to display the score, so add in an if else statement with the condition this value is greater than length of score. In the if portion hide and in the else portion add a switch costume to letter this value of score and show. We then want to handle the UI for the game over screen. What I want is for the timer UI to go away and for the number of pumpkins to be displayed in the center of the screen. To do this, drag in a when I receive end block, and to this add an if-else statement. Set the condition to be if this value is greater than 5, and drag a delete this clone block into the if portion of the statement. Drag another if-else statement into the else portion, this time with the condition if this value is equal to 0. In the if portion, add a go-to block with y position 18. For the x position, drag in a minus operator and drag in a multiplication operator into the left-hand side of this. Type minus 11 into the first input space, and for the second we want length of score. For the other side of the minus operator, type 16. Copy-paste this go-to block into the else portion. Now take the equation from the x input and move it into the left-hand side of an addition operator. Replace the 16 with the 10. For the other side of the addition, we need a multiplication. 22 times this value. This now acts as we need it to. Let's create a start screen. Go back to the player sprite and find the when green flag is clicked script. Remove the broadcast play block and replace it with a hide block. Then go to the play button sprite. Drag in a when green flag is clicked block and attach a go-to block to this. We need x to be 0 and y minus 60. Then switch backdrop to titles, switch costume to play and show. Then add in a forever loop. Within this loop, set size to 100% and then set brightness to 0. Drag in a wait until block with the condition touching mouse pointer. Then copy these 3 blocks and put them in the end of the loop. Change the new size block to be 115%, the new brightness block to be 15, and then take the touching mouse pointer condition out of the new wait until block and move it into a not operator and put that back in. Then drag in a when this sprite is clicked block and attach a broadcast play block, and then a hide block. Finally, add in a when I receive end block, and to this attach a switch costume to replay block and a show block. Today we'll be adding in sound effects and getting our game published. Let's start with the music because that's the easiest part. It's just a simple loop. Go to the workplace for this stage and drag in a when green flag is clicked block. Attach a forever loop to this, and within this add a play sound pumpkin patch panic song until done. That's literally it. Now onto the sound effects. Let's start with the sounds for the player sprite. Find the when E key is pressed script. The first sound that we want to add is the sound for picking up the pumpkins, and because this is a sound you'll be hearing a lot, we're going to be doing something called pitch shifting, which means that the sound will be played at a random pitch each time, adding some subtle variation. To do this, add a set pitch effect block into this if statement with the item touching +1 of pumpkins is equal to 4 condition, and set it to be pick random -10 to 10. Then play sound crunch 1, and within the distance to boxes less than 32 function, play sound jangle 1. This will play a sound when you bank a pumpkin, and with that we're already done with the player sprite. The pumpkin sprite doesn't need any sound, so skip on to the enemy sprite. Go to the when I started a clone script that handles the main enemy behaviors. Find the if statement in the ghosts mechanics with the condition distance to player is less than 32 and petrified is equal to 0, and add a start sound block into this loop. Drag a pick random block into the input space and set it to be 3 to 4. This will play one of 2 ghost sounds when the ghost petrifies the player. Then scroll down to the mechanics for the zombies and spiders and find the distance to player is less than 32 if statement. Add an if statement to this with the condition this type is equal to 1. In the if portion, play sound growl 1, and in the else portion, play sound scuttle. The enemies will now play the appropriate sound when scared away by the player. Now go to the pumpkin check script. In the if statement that replaces this check of pumpkins with 0, add a play sound crunch block, and in the if statement that replaces it with 5, add a play sound cobweb block. Pumpkins being trampled and spiders making webs will now both play sounds. Finally, find the when I started the clone script that causes ghosts to fly away after a few seconds. After the wait 5 seconds block, add a play sound block and set it to pick random 5 to 6. This will cause a sound effect to play as the ghost flies away. We can now skip all the way to the play button sprite, add a start sound mouse click 1 block into the when this sprite is clicked script, and in the forever loop under the when green flag is clicked script, add a start sound mouse click 2 sound after the wait until touching mouse pointer block. This adds a sound when you mouse over and when you click the play button. And that's all the sounds we need. So let's set up the project thumbnail. In Scratch, the way that thumbnails work is that whatever is on screen when you save and exit the project for the final time is saved as the thumbnail. Go to the thumbnail sprite and simply add a when green flag is clicked block with a hide block. Then have the sprite show. Make sure that it is at position 0, 0 and there's nothing in front of it. If this is not the case, hit the go to front layer block. Then hit share. The project is now available on Scratch, but I'm also going to show you how to convert your project to HTML so that you can upload it to sites such as itch.io. But if this isn't of interest to you, then we can leave things here. Thanks for watching. Bye. But if you think this is going to be useful, please stick around. First, you're going to need to download some image files they'll be using for the game's page, linked in the description. The file will contain a thumbnail image, a loading screen image, and a page icon. Download the zip file and extract all. Then copy the URL for your Scratch project and go to the TurboWarp package manager website, again linked down below. Paste the URL into the box where prompted, upload the icon image you downloaded for the page icon, and upload the loading image for the loading screen image. Make sure that plain HTML is selected as your environment and hit package. You can upload this to any sites that accept HTMLs, but my website of choice is itch.io. If you want to upload to itch, then go to itch.io and either log into your account if you have one, or sign up if you don't. Select upload new project from this drop down, fill in all of the gaps as prompted by the website with the project's title and so on. Where it says upload files, upload the file we downloaded from TurboWarp, and for the cover image, upload the thumbnail image that you downloaded earlier. In the game's description, add instructions for how to play the game, or copy paste them from the description on Scratch. It would also be great if you could drop me a small credit, as this is a game using my own original assets and concepts. Save and view page, then set it to public. And just like that, you've moved your Scratch project beyond the confines of the Scratch website, and you've also reached the end of this tutorial series. Congratulations. And if you aren't ready to be finished with your game, or if you just want an extra challenge, I want you to try adding in a system that increases your remaining time by 5 seconds every 10 pumpkins that you collect. Or else, maybe come up with a new enemy type for you to add in. But other than that, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this series and this video. Like and subscribe if you did. Let me know if there's something you want to see more of. Join the Discord link down below, and I'll see you next week with another video. Bye!